So geoengineering, what is geoengineering? Geoengineering we define basically as the intentional manipulation of large portions of the planet to decrease potential climate change or global warming, basically. Paul Crutzen, for example, a number of years ago suggested that if we increase particulate input into the atmosphere, such as increasing sulfur particles in the atmosphere, that could decrease the amount of incoming solar radiation. So that would help to decrease the amount of global warming from the increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. That's one category, is decreasing the amount of incoming solar radiation. Another category, I guess as I said, is having mechanisms, usually biological mechanisms on land or in the ocean, that take up the carbon dioxide and sequester it in forms that doesn't become available again for many, many hundreds to thousands of years. You know, about 5 to 10 years ago, the scientific community wouldn't even talk about geoengineering, basically. You brought it up and there was this, oh, we don't do that, we don't talk about that. And there's been a big shift in the last just couple of years. And the question becomes why? And why is it becoming now a topic of conversation and of research now, whereas just a few years ago it wasn't? And I think the reason is, or one of the reasons is that everyone is beginning to see that the countries around the world have not been able to decrease their emissions of greenhouse gases, basically mostly CO2, into the atmosphere from fossil fuel combustion primarily. And we're still on a very rapidly increasing trajectory of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. And that there's considerable concern that we're not going to be able to turn that around in time. In time for what, you might say? Well, before there is very serious climate change, very disruptive climate change. And if we get to that point, what are we going to do about it? And we need to have the thoughts are, we need to have some quote-unquote solutions in our back pocket. And I think from the scientific community's perspective, it has been that there wasn't a lot of willingness to engage in research on geoengineering because it would sound like we were promoting it. Okay? But I think we've come around to realizing that if in fact we get to the point that countries, individual countries or groups of countries, want and decide they're going to implement some geoengineering schemes, start to do that, we need to be able to tell them what some of the unintended consequences of those things might be.